So thank you all for coming this very busy day to this year's final event in the Department of English, Rhetoric, and Writing's Visiting Writer Series. And happy National Poetry Month. Tonight's reading is brought to you by the Georgia Poetry Circuit, and it's my honor to introduce to you Kim Addonizio. Kim Addonizio is the author of 7 poetry collections, 2 novels, 2 short story collections, a book of essays, and 2 books on writing poetry. Her poetry collection, Tell Me, was a finalist for the National Book Award, and her work has received numerous additional awards, including fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts, a Pushcart Prize, and the John Ciardi Lifetime Achievement Award. Her latest books are Mortal Trash, Poems, and a memoir and essays, Bukowski in a Sundress. A musician as well, she plays harmonica with the Word music group Non-Stop Beautiful Ladies, and has 2 word music CDs, Swearing, Smoking, Drinking, and Kissing with Susan Brown, and My Black Angel, the companion to My Black Angel Blues, Poems, and Portraits, a collaboration with woodcut artist Charles D. Jones. The daughter of a former tennis champion and a sports writer, Kim Addonizio was born in Washington, D.C., and attended college in San Francisco, earning her BA and MA from San Francisco State University. Having spent much of her adult life in the Bay Area, she currently lives and teaches workshops in Oakland, California, and internationally. Kim Addonizio might be described as a love poet, as in these lines from one of her poems. Love, according to the Greeks, came in 4 flavors, eros being the most likely to turn to old gum, and so end up smashed on a sidewalk by the boots and spiked heels of happier passers-by. Or these, from plastic. If your love is deeper than the ocean, then the surface of your love is a swirl of swill, toothbrushes and swizzle sticks carried by the inevitable current. Or from Candy Heart Valentine, you were someone to me once, but now I've razored through most of the frames. Both world and word-wise, these poems explode the manufactured and cliché tropes of romantic love. But this is just one facet of her work's brilliance. Kim Addonizio's poetry is as nuanced as it is bold, as intimate as it is irreverent. It is at once passionate and provocative, outrageous and unrelentingly beautiful. Readers, reviewers, and fellow writers, in attempting to describe her work, tend to gush via paradox. As the poet Tom Lux wrote, Kim Addonizio's imagination is like a runaway train under control. With language at once intricate and in your face, with a voice both witty and wicked, sarcastic and sincere. Real life is mostly a blitzkrieg, she writes, but also, I miss lying next to you, feeling like a lifeboat roped to an ocean liner. Respectful of the darkness and reverberating with a wild tenderness, as Lux put it. The voice you will hear tonight is one of extraordinary grit and grace, and it is truly my privilege to welcome now Kim Addonizio.
Thanks for that, and thank you guys for coming. It seems like it's a kind of a crazy night out there, and it feels really weird to be standing here in a church. What am I doing here? I feel like I'm going to be struck by a bolt of lightning soon. But I thought I would read you some poems, not only from the current book, but I had a kind of collected poems come out in the UK. And what's cool about that is that I don't have to carry around all my books or find them on my iPad, but I have most of them in this other book that came out from Blood Axe Books. And so I thought I'd read you some poems from earlier books, since I know a few of you have read my latest one. And then I'll end with some, or I'll move to some in the new book. And it's going to be kind of dark, I'm sorry. But I think especially because I was watching CNN today and I was watching all the images of what's happening in Syria, where they just gassed a bunch of civilians, and they're showing all these little kids. And it's got me kind of upset. But let's try to just, make a space for what light we have against all the darkness that's going on. So my new book is called Mortal Trash, and so I thought I'd go back to this earlier book and start with a poem called Garbage, to keep with the theme. Don't think about where it goes after you tie it up in its white bag and squash it down into the can dragged out to the curb. Don't think of the stink of the truck backing up, or the men in their filthy gloves hanging off the sides, cursing in the near dark of a new day in which somewhere someone is about to be thrown into a cell, the way garbage is thrown into a deep pit for burning, the way bodies are thrown in to be shoveled over. Don't think about the dump, the scavenging rats, the reeking piles they tunnel through, the flattened shoes, the dolls with their eyes torn out, the pennies, the lost wedding ring. Whatever's found its way there and won't return except as a stain, a bad smell on the air, a poison seeding the clouds until it rains back down. But today, the weather's lovely. Look at the sky, its purity, its nullity, only gulls crossing it on their way to the beaches. Don't let the gulls remind you of how they dive beak first into fish, a fish floating up with the sewage. Especially don't think of dead things, or of vultures, how they wait so patiently while something is bleeding into the dirt, and then jostle each other as they hunch black frocked around it, feeding the way everyone feeds. Oh, don't think now of all the food you've wasted, scraped off plates or gone bad on the shelf, in the fridge. You couldn't help it. You meant to save everyone, the children especially, but it keeps filling up the house, the thick black print of newspapers, the petitions for money with lists of their names, their actual faces. They're still alive. They're out there with the guards and the soldiers and the flies. So don't think of how clean your house is. Don't think for a minute you've gotten it all. Look at your hands. They're covered with it. You can try to wash them or else plunge them in. Even one finger, take it and scrape up a little of the sludge and the muck and the stench of the human. Feel how the barest hope clings there. And on that cheerful starting note, it's funny because it's a poem I wrote a long time ago, but it's amazing how many poems you write at a certain time and a certain political time, and then it turns out it's always the same time. Or as Janis Joplin put it in another context, it's all the same fucking day, man. So, I don't know, I was thinking about that today just from the news, and how many things are still similar so many years later, which might make you want to drink. This poem is called Last Call. It's the hour when everyone's drunk and the bar turns marvelous. Music swirling over the red booths, smoke rising from neglected cigarettes, as in each glass, ice slides into other ice, dissolving. It's when one stranger nudges another and says, staring at the blurred rows of pour spouts, I hear they began dwarf tossing in France, and the second man nods and lays his head on the bar's slick surface, not caring if he dies there, wanting, in fact, to die there, among the good friends he's just met, his cheek in a wet pool of spilled beer. It's when the woman in the corner gets up and wobbles to the middle of the room, leaving her blouse draped over a stool. Someone is buying the house a final round. The cabs are being summoned, and the gods that try to save us from ourselves are taking us by the neck gently and dropping us into the night. It's the hour of the blind and the dead, of lost loves who come to claim you, finally, holding open the swinging door, repeating over and over a name that must be yours. Feels kind of churchy in here. I think all poetry readings should be held in bars or cafes. And so it's always a strange experience. I had a boyfriend once who had never been to a poetry reading, and so, I invited him to one of mine. It was in a bookstore, and he got very uncomfortable looking around, and he said, "It's like a church in here. What's wrong with everybody?" So I think that's so interesting, that we think of a sacred space. I mean, I believe in quietness as much as I believe in noise, but it's kind of interesting to me that we always think of the sacred as having a hushed environment, or we commonly think of that way, and we don't think of it so much as a space where there's, raucous joy, which I think is really sacred too. That has nothing to do with this poem, which is called Scary Movies. Today the cloud shapes are terrifying, and I keep expecting some enormous black and white B-movie cyclops to appear at the edge of the horizon, to come striding over the ocean and drag me from my kitchen to the deep cave that flickered into my young brain one Saturday at the Baronet Theater, where I sat helpless between my older brothers, pumped up on candy and horror. That cave, the litter of human bones gnawed on and flung toward the entrance, I can smell their stench as clearly as the bacon fat from breakfast. This is how it feels to lose it. Not sanity, but whatever it is that helps you get up in the morning and actually leave the house on those days when it seems like death in his brown uniform is cruising his payroll truck of packages through your neighborhood. I think of a friend's voice on her answering machine. "Hi, I'm not here." The morning of her funeral, the calls filling up the tape and the mail still arriving, and I feel as afraid as I was after all those vampire movies. These are the early vampire movies when they weren't so gorgeous and sexy, okay? And I feel as afraid as I was after all those vampire movies when I'd come home and lie awake all night, rigid in my bed, unable to get up even to pee because the undead were waiting underneath it. If I so much as stuck a bare foot out there in the unprotected air, they'd grab me by the ankle and pull me under. And my parents said there was nothing there. When I was older, I would know better. And now they're dead, and I'm older, and I know better. One of the things that you guys know who read Bukowski and the Sundress, which was my book of essays about the writing life, is that I killed off my mother for that poem before she was actually dead, because it made a better poem to say that both my parents were dead, even though they weren't at the time. But, that's one of the things that you do in poems is you kind of, you, for the sake of the poem, you change things and you make things fit in a different way. And then eventually it's true. And I'm really sorry this is so dark, but here we go. It's called Dead Girls.
Yeah.
I love that you laugh at that. Thank you. I know. Okay, whatever. Because if you can't laugh at that, what's the alternative? Dead Girls. show up often in the movies, face down in the weeds beside the highway. Kids find them by the river or in the woods under leaves, one pink-nailed hand thrust up. Detectives stand over them in studio apartments or lift their photos off pianos in the houses they almost grew up in. A dead girl can kick a movie into gear better than a saloon brawl, better than a factory explosion, just by lying there. Anyone can play her. Any child off the street can be hogtied and dumped from a van, or strangled blue in a kitchen, a bathroom, an alley, a school. That's the beauty of a dead girl. Even a plain one who feels worthless as a clod of dirt, broken by the sorrow of gazing all day at a fashion magazine, can be made whole, redeemed by what she finally can't help being, the center of attention, the special, desirable, dead girl. It's funny because that book had actually 3 poems about dead kids in there, and I think it was because, I'm the mother of the girl, and, of course, all parents, worry about their kids out in the world, and I think especially when you have girls, you realize how vulnerable they are in the world and how perilous it is to be a girl. And at the time, I think my daughter was about 12 or 13, and Polly Klaas was a girl of her own age who got abducted in Petaluma and killed. And so I think that was especially on my mind, and that's why I started writing about that. Because that's sort of what you do, right? Things that bother you or that impress you in some way, whether those are really joyous things or really awful things, make you sort of want to respond, and if you're a writer, that's the way you try to respond. So I knew I was going to be reading in a church, and I thought, okay, I have to do something that relates to God or gods. So this isn't actually God, this is the gods. And I was raised Catholic, so we had something called the Baltimore Catechism, which asked all the hard questions of life and then answered them. It's kind of nice. And so this poem sort of asks questions about the meaning of things and offers some answers. It's called Storm Catechism. The gods are rinsing their just boiled pasta in a colander, which is why it is humid and fitfully raining down here in the steel sink of mortal life. Sometimes you can smell the truffle oil and hear the ambrosia being knocked back. Sometimes you catch a drift of laughter in that thunder crack. Zeus knocking over his glass, spilling lightning into a tree. The tree shears away from itself and falls on the car, killing a high school girl. Or maybe it just crashes down on a few trash cans and the next day gets cut up and hauled away by the city. Either way, hilarity. The gods are infinitely perfect, as is their divine mac and cheese. Where does macaroni come from? Where does matter? Why does the cat act autistic when you call her, then bat around a moth for an hour, watching intently as it drags its wings over the area rug? The gods were here first, and they're bigger. They always were and always will be living it up in their father's mansion. You only crawled from the drain a few millennia ago, after inventing legs for yourself so you could stand, inventing fists in order to raise them and curse the heavens. Do the gods see us? Will the waters be rising soon? The waters will be rising soon. Find someone or something to cling to. I think you can sort of get a sense of my general existential perspective on life from that. And it's sort of been raining wherever I've gone lately. I was in New York for a week and it was raining there, and then I came here thinking, great, Georgia's going to be warm, and then, it was raining. And so anyway, this is another rain poem, and I'm really interested in idioms, these sort of cultural expressions that tell us a lot about who the people are in a country and what they think about and what they have around them. And I'm just kind of fascinated by different expressions that change from culture to culture. Like here we say it's raining cats and dogs, and in other cultures they say all kinds of other things. And that's what this poem is about. It's kind of a little tour of what other countries say about rain. And there are some words here that might be, there's a little piece of it that might be helpful to know. There's a little part of it where there's the word phalon, which is actually this old English word that just means falling, or to fall. And then there's fission and thermonuclear, and nuclear fission is about splitting the atom, and it's how they created bombs. So when they talk about thermonuclear bombs, what they're talking about is splitting the atom, and that's fission. And that creates all this amazing energy, here come Hiroshima and Nagasaki from that. And then they discovered the fusion bomb. And fusion is when instead of breaking apart the nuclei of the atom, you shove them together, and it creates an even bigger explosion. And the way you set off a fusion bomb is with a fission bomb. So you can imagine how huge that is. And that's the sun's energy is basically that kind of energy. And then there is the cobalt bomb, which if we ever experience will wipe out all life on Earth. So there you have it. Anyway, that's a little piece of this. This is called Idioms for Rain. Wheelbarrows are falling in the Czech Republic, but in Wales, old ladies and sticks are landing on the farms not yet carried off by owls. Knives and forks are clattering on the barns. In the sky above New York City, one dark cloud of dogs, one of feral cats, one of lawn gnomes lined up with buckets, more clouds erupting from their corncob pipes, the storm getting ready to hammer the rooftop gardens and drive pigeons into the arms of gargoyles. Gurgle, gargle. Some dragon is down with the flu, asking, who am I without my kundalini breath? Why don't I have any friends? As soon as I'm better, I'm going to torch an elementary school. In Union Square, the vendors are packing up peaches and artisanal cheeses. Castles and pawns are being disappeared from the chess players' tables, shitty art reinstalled in the museums of panel vans. Umbrellas and hoodies, tarps on the carts of the homeless, hunkering down while leaves skid around. In Greece, chair legs drive themselves into stone and sink into the Aegean. But in Syria, chemical weapons are descending, meaning raining down like secretaries and restaurant workers from the towers, meaning metaphor is being abandoned for the hell of the real, meaning what falls from the sky keeps falling. Phalon, fission, thermonuclear, but not yet cobalt. What the rain said to the wind was not, you push and I'll pelt, but let's see who can destroy the most flowers, though it also may have said, sometimes I want to weep softly while you moan over the seedlings. In Germany, it rains puppies where once rained Walther bullets, and in Denmark, shoemakers' apprentices land softly on the earth and set off to teach whom they can. And I meant to mention too, it's probably clear from that the Walther was a gun, but it was also a particular kind of gun. It was a gun made in Germany, and it was the gun issued to the German police force under Hitler and the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. So that's sort of a reference to the Nazi regime. And it's also the gun that Hitler killed himself with in the Fuhrer bunker. So, moving on to Lives of the Poets. This is a poem that has a lot of allusions. I've been sort of more and more interested in kind of talking to the tradition and talking to the dead poets and connecting with the writers and the spirits who came before me, not in a woo-woo Ouija board way, but more sort of reading their poems and feeling really connected to a lot of these writers, and then sort of thinking about them and talking back to them, arguing and agreeing and having a conversation with them in my poems, which means that if you don't read a lot of poetry and you don't know some of these references, there are things you might not get, but at the same time, I'm really aware that I'm trying to say something to people, so I'm hoping that that these poems can speak to you even if you don't know a lot about poetry, and that if you do know about it or that you learn more, you'll find sort of a different level in there, just the way when you get to know somebody or you get interested in something new, you see one thing at first, and then the more you get into it, the more you learn about it, and the more interesting it gets, whether that's a sport or an art or a person, where you become intrigued by the things that you don't know and you want to know more. And hopefully some of those things are kind of there to be discovered if they don't appear for you the first time. So there's a lot of references to different poems, to different poets in here, but I don't think you really have to know it to understand the poem. It's just, if you know who some of those poets were, you can go, aha, she's talking about Keats here, she's talking about Philip Larkin here, or whoever it is. And that's kind of a fun game to play too. So, Lives of the Poets. One stood among the violets, listening to a bird. One went to the toilet and was struck by the moon. One felt hopeless until a trumpet crashed, and then, lo, he became a diamond. I have a shovel. Can I turn it into a poem? On my stove, I'm boiling some milk thistle. I hope it will turn into a winged thesis before you stop reading. Look, I'm topless. Listen, approaching hooves. One drowned in a swimming pool. One removed his shoes and urined off a bridge. One lives with Alzheimer's in a state facility, spittle in his white beard. It turns out words are no help. But here I am with my shovel, digging like a fool beside the spilth and splosh of the ungirdled sea. I can't stop. The horses are coming, the thieves. I still haven't found lasting love. I still want to hear viols in the little beach hotel that's torn down and gone. I want to see again the fish, schooling and glittering like a veil, where the waves shove against the breakwater. Gone is the girl in her white slip, testing the chill with one bare foot. It's too cold, but she goes in, so carefully. Oh. And, this is one I was sort of, so I don't know, those of you who are maybe have been reading poetry, any of those things that hit a chord or struck a bell, or one of those expressions there, like the violets, Keats, and going to the toilet and being struck by the moon, Philip Larkin, he's a poet I admire a lot. His opening line is something like, groping back to bed after a piss. That's the first line of his poem. And then he sees the moon and has this sort of faux romantic moment, really, about the moon, where first it's like, oh my God, the moon, it's all of these things, and then he's like, no, not really, because Larkin was kind of a bitter guy, especially as he grew older. But I've always kind of liked his writing, and there are a lot of other writers sort of mentioned in there. The Trumpet Crash is from one of my favorite writers, Gerard Manley Hopkins, a 19th century writer who actually wrote about God, but also loved nature and wrote about all kinds of things and had an amazing way with words. And it's a poem about his doubt in God. See, I'm like feeling the God vibrations in here somehow. So he wrote a lot about God, but he also had a lot of doubt about it. And in this particular poem, he's talking about nature and he's talking about doubt. And then I'm not sure why or how. I've always wondered how this happens, but by the end of the poem, suddenly it's low, and then there's a trumpet crash, and suddenly he's okay with everything, which I never really understood. Like, what was that moment that changed everything? But this, I guess, would be, I don't know if it's in the realm of the sacred or the profane, but this is someone who's kind of in trouble, and I think we've all known probably people like the girl who speaks in this poem, or we've seen her and kind of either been her or felt sorry for her. It's called Party. I know we've just met and everything, but I'd really like to fall apart on you now. I'd like to think you're the kind of person who'd refill my glass all night, then pour me shit-faced into your car and take me home with you so I could regurgitate salmon and triple cream brie and chocolate strawberries into your toilet. And then you'd cook me a little something. I'd like to think you're the kind of person who cooks while I rambled incoherently about my loneliness. I know we've just met, but I feel like maybe you'd feed me and tuck me into your big bed and only touch me as you covered me with the comforter. I feel like you own a comforter. I also somehow sense that your family was extremely dysfunctional in a way that differs from mine only in surface details, like which person was the black hole and which the distant, faint mark in space that might have been a star. I feel all that. I feel kind of, I don't know, like my inner space heater and TV and washing machine are all going at once. Do you have a coffee grinder? I have an ice cube tray. The last ice disappeared a few months ago into the freezer mist. I miss that ice, but once the mist gets hold of it, it's gone for good. Unrelenting mist, many-headed mist. Who knew mist had undone so many? I feel like my underwear would fit in your silverware caddy. It's just a feeling, though. I could be wrong about that. Could you get me another drink now? I think we have chemistry. I really need a lab partner. Could I just, let my molecules separate while you keep an eye on the burner? The flame's kind of fickle. Here's hoping it doesn't go out. So, like I said, been that girl or seen that girl or, I think I'm gonna move to just 2 or 3 poems from an earlier book called My Black Angel, which was the book that was mentioned in the introduction. That was kind of a cool project because we not only did the book and this artist created these incredible woodcuts of blues musicians, but then we also got to record a CD, and I got to play harmonica with a bunch of great musicians, and we sort of did all the poems in the book as a CD, and I recited them, and we put music to various things, and that was really kind of a blast. And this is a poem called Cigar Box Banjo. It's also one that, if you are interested in sort of different kinds of collaborations between artists, there's a site called motionpoems.org, which makes little poetry films. And so what they do is they commission filmmakers to make short films based on people's poems. So I was fortunate enough to have 2 of my poems chosen for this. And Cigar Box Banjo is one of the poems they made into a film. Did a great job with it. And the other thing, I guess, this is a sort of a poem about how things are contained in other things, like, the oak is contained in the acorn. So it's sort of about how everything is right there already in the seed and becomes something else. And the first line mentions an early Delta blues musician. Blind Willie Johnson could coax music from a single string. God plucked a rib and found a woman. Concert aria in the gypsy song, long groan of orgasm in the first kiss, plastic bag of heroin ripening in the poppy fields. Right now, in a deep pocket of a politician's brain, a bad idea is traveling along an axon to make sure the future resembles a cobra rather than an ocarina. Still, there's hope in every cartoon bib above which a tiny, unfinished skull in its beneficence dispenses a drooling grin. The heart may be a trashy organ, but when it plucks its shiny banjo, I see blue wings in the rain. And this is a tribute to Gwendolyn Brooks, who wrote a famous poem called We Real Cool, the pool players 7 at the Golden Shovel. And I'm not sure if I can recite it all. It goes, we real cool, we left school, we sing sin, we thin gin, we lurk late, we strike straight, we jazz June, we die soon. So I sort of took, I think I mixed up a couple lines there, but that's the basic poem. And so I took that sort of idea and I wrote a poem called The Women. We turned 16. We cannabis and Vicodin. We dexedrine. We stolen scarves and dresses, disordered in boys' cars and falling down on dance floors. We waste years and wishes and finally marry or wait for a king who does dishes. We curse bosses. We birth give and bring forth and feel our unworth. We divorce. We grow uncool. We carpool. We forgive those who lie down against us. We lose June. We lose July. In August we look in mirrors and want to die. We hot flash, we worry cash, night cream, lotus jewel, and bicep curl, we try. We buy high heels, we lunch, we find lumps. We put our feet in the stirrups, and our lives in the hands, and our hearts to the wheel which grinds us. And so, over time, we polish to a hard shine, and we divine. And I'll end with this one called Wine Tasting. And you know how, people who drink wine talk about all the flavors in it and all the tastes in it, and it's really poetic a lot of times. So wine tasting. I think I detect cracked leather. I'm pretty certain I smell the cherries from a Shirley Temple my father bought me in 1959 in a bar in Orlando, Florida, and the chlorine from my mother's bathing cap. And last winter's kisses, like salt on black ice, like the moon slung away from the earth. When Li Po drank wine, it's an early Chinese poet, and a monk, and all the Chinese poet monks drank a lot of wine. When Li Po drank wine, the moon dove in the river, and he staggered after. Probably he tasted laughter. When my friend Susan drinks, she cries because she's Irish and childless. I'd like to taste one more time the rain that arrived one afternoon and fell just short of where I stood. So I leaned my face in, alive in both worlds at once, knowing it would end and not caring. Thank you. Thanks for coming out. And I think we have time if anybody has a question or two, wants to have a short conversation, that would be great. I don't know if people just want to have a moment of silence or... I don't know if I'm having a hot flash or it's just really hot up here, but I'm sweating like crazy, so... So if anybody has a comment or a question, I'm happy to talk. And if not, we can all go to the bar, and that would be great too. Raven, right?
Yeah. Just a random question off the wall. By any chance, could you yodel?
Oh. Could I yodel? Do I yodel?
Would you?
Would I? Okay, I think the yodel that I learned. I was, okay. You put me on the spot now. And I haven't practiced, but I can see if I can still do the yodel I learned at 14. That's it. That's my trick. Thank you for asking. Yes, I can.
Anytime.
Any other questions? That's the only trick, so don't ask me if I can do anything else, because yeah.
Can you just talk about why this book is entitled Mortal Trash?
Yeah, I was mentioning Hopkins earlier. It's actually from that same poem where he says, "Lo, a trumpet crash, and I become a diamond." And the title of that one is that nature is a Heraclean fire, and of the comfort of the resurrection. And there's this great line in it that says, "Flesh fades and mortal trash falls to the residuary worm," which so the worm inherits everything, and we become essentially trash in some way, the physical body. And I was just really struck by that line and that feeling and that reality and the way he said it. And I thought, what a great phrase, mortal trash. So this is definitely a book sort of haunted by mortality and also sort of about the trash we leave on the earth. You mentioned this piece called Plastic, which is about that place called Garbage Island. It's a big, is it gyre or gyre? I don't know how you pronounce that word. Turning and turning the winding gyre. I think it's gyre. Anyway, there's a big thing out in the Pacific where apparently all the plastic that we produce that gets into the environment ends up in this place in the Pacific Ocean, and it's just really gross, as you can imagine. And there's so much of it out there now. It's that they call it Garbage Island. It's this huge thing, and so I think part of it is sort of about that kind of trash as well. So mostly I like the title, and then I found other ways that it ended up sort of fitting with themes and concerns and things I was thinking about. Yeah. Anybody else? Maybe one more question if anybody has something they want to say.
Don't get scared. This is a real question.
Can you yodel again?
No.
No.
So you talked a little bit about it in Bukowski in a Sundress, but I was wondering, what is your, I don't want to say literary relationship to Bukowski, but kind of how did that comment about you being Charles Bukowski in a Sundress, how did that affect you and then just kind of take over your work that you would publish something under the title of Bukowski in a Sundress?
Well, the essay in that book really talks about that and says, it was said by a snarky critic. I don't particularly like Bukowski. I haven't read that much, but that essay talks about how the critic said that and how it obviously wasn't a compliment. But it gave me a great chance to rip on critics and talk about, especially not all male critics, but certain male critics who treat women's work in a certain way. And in a very sexist and condescending way, often. And, the sort of lens through which they look at work by women, literary work, and other things. And so it gave me a chance to talk about that, and as snarky a comment as I think it was meant to be, I also thought that's really funny. And I just thought it would make a great title. So, the essay talks about how I didn't know much Bukowski, and I decided to do some research, which basically consisted of cracking a beer and sitting down and watching some Bukowski movies. That was the way I sort of did my research, which maybe was kind of fitting. But he, as I also said in that essay, he said some things that I really agree with about life and about sort of what it means to sort of, that we're all consumed by the trivialities of life. Why is that the case when we're only here for a short time? And he said a lot of things about a lot of poetry being sort of precious and self-important that I also agreed with. So it was interesting to kind of see that. But mainly it was, what an asshole. And that's also very funny. And I wanted to do something with that. So, yeah. I think you had a question also behind you, and then we'll we'll end. Yeah.
Could you tell us something about your fiction?
Yeah, well, I've published 2 novels and 2 story collections. And the first book is called Little Beauties, and it's about a woman with OCD and whose husband has left her, and she meets a younger woman who's pregnant and having a baby, and they sort of form this unlikely friendship. And actually my daughter, who's an actor, is hopefully making that into a movie that she's going to produce and act in. She's in TV right now, in theater, and she's decided to take it on as a project after it was actually optioned by a couple studios and dropped a couple times by the studios. And then the second novel is about a homeless woman looking for her love, who's been in jail, but she doesn't know where he is. So they're very different kinds of books. One's kind of a comedy, and then one's very dark. And then the first book of stories is a very kind of weird book that was inspired a lot by the writer Kathy Acker at a time when I was trying to write the wildest, craziest stuff I could, just to see what happened. I don't think it's a very realized book, but the second book of stories is called The Palace of Illusions, and I think I had a much better handle on how to write a story then. And that came out, I think, in 2015 or so. So that's the fiction side of things. And now I'm much more interested in writing some new essays and getting back to poetry whenever the Poetry Muse deigns to come down. And she's been really, I don't know where she is. She's like the farthest star right now, and I'm just waiting for her to come back around so that something more can happen with poetry. So, as a writer, it doesn't matter that you've written as much as it matters that you're writing. I think all writers feel like that, so hopefully I will be soon. And thank you guys for listening. Really appreciate you being here. Thank you.